April 25, 1945. Dawn over the Po Valley, northern Italy. A thin mist clings to the flooded rice fields like breath on glass. In the half-light, three women move along a raised earthen dike, Mauser rifles slung across their backs, bare feet caked with the black mud of the Lombard Plain. Their names are Iris, Laura, and Silvia, 22, 19, and 24 years old. They have not eaten in 36 hours. The only sound is the distant lowing of abandoned cattle and the soft slap of water against the levee. Then from the west comes another sound, unfamiliar yet unmistakable, the steady, unhurried rumble of American half-tracks rolling on solid rubber tires, not the harsh clatter of German steel tracks that once tore these same roads to pieces. This moment, frozen between night and morning on the last day of fascist rule in Italy, would quietly reshape the souls of thousands of young women who had fought as partisans. It was the instant when the abstract idea of liberation became flesh and voice, when centuries of prescribed inferiority collided with the simple, almost casual equality offered by soldiers from a nation most of them could not even locate on a map. For 20 months, the Italian resistance had bled in the mountains and marshes. By official counts of the Comitato de Liberazione Nazionale Alta Italia, more than 35,000 women served actively as staffette, saboteurs, nurses, and, increasingly after the winter of 1944, as armed combatants in the Brigate Garibaldi, Giustizia e Libertà, and autonomous formations. They carried messages sewn inside their brassiers, planted explosives under railway bridges, executed fascists and German officers in moonlit alleys. They did so knowing that capture meant torture, rape, public hanging, or deportation to Ravensbrück or Bolzano. In the Republic of Salo, Mussolini's dying puppet state, a woman caught with a weapon was no longer granted the dubious mercy of a firing squad. She was handed to the Brigate Nere, or the SS, for interrogation. Yet they fought on, driven by hatred of the invader and by a patriotism that had, for the first time, granted them agency. They expected the Americans, when they finally came, to behave like all previous armies. They expected to be invisible at best, prey at worst. They had heard the stories from 1943, when Allied troops first landed in Sicily and Calabria, villages plundered, women taken by force. The ancient law of conquest reasserted. They expected cigarettes flicked at their feet, coarse jokes in a language they did not understand, and orders barked at them as inferiors. They expected, above all, to remain women in a world that had never granted them the status of full citizens. What they met instead on that April morning and in the weeks that followed was something no European army had ever offered armed women: recognition. The first half-track slows. A tall Negro soldier from the 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers, stands in the open turret. He raises one hand, palm open, the universal gesture of peace. Behind him, white soldiers from the 10th Mountain Division and Brazilian Expeditionary Force troops dismount without forming ranks, without leering. An officer, Captain John Weidman of the 473rd Infantry Regiment, steps forward, removes his helmet, and addresses the three mud-stained partisans in careful, textbook Italian learned in night classes at Fort Benning. Signorine, siete delle partigiane? Iris, the eldest, lifts her chin. Si, Comandante, Brigata Garibaldi, Settore Pianura. The captain nods once, as if this is the most ordinary thing in the world, then turns to his radio man and says in English loud enough for all to hear, "Tell the kitchen truck to break out the good coffee and find 3 pairs of boots that fit." No one laughs, no one whistles, no one photographs them as curiosities. Within minutes, hot coffee, real coffee, not the chicory and burnt barley they have lived on for years, is poured into tin cups and handed to them with the same respect offered to male commanders. A sergeant produces chocolate bars, Hershey's Tropic D, still in wax paper, and places one in each woman's hand as though it were a medal. Then, most astonishing of all, the Americans ask for their report: enemy dispositions, minefields, locations of the remaining German strongpoints along the Po. They spread a map on the hood of a jeep and listen while Iris traces routes with a finger still blackened from cordite. This was not an isolated incident. From the Gothic line to the Alpine Valleys, from Liguria to the Veneto, The same scene repeated itself in 100 variations. On May 1st, 1945, the command of the 88th Infantry Division, the Blue Devils, issued General Order 47, formally recognizing female partisan units as belligerent forces entitled to all considerations accorded regular Allied troops. Captured documents from the 305th Infantry Division, found in the villa at Castelfranco Veneto, contained frantic complaints about Americani che trattano le banditenweiben come ufficiali, Americans who treat the bandit women like officers. Oberstleutnant Hans Becker wrote in his war diary on April 28, "The moral effect is devastating. Our own Lancer now believe the Americans have an inexhaustible supply not only of tanks, but of dignity." The recurring symbol that threaded through every encounter was simple, almost trivial, yet it carried the weight of an entire civilization: the Hershey's chocolate bar. To the partisans, it was not mere candy. It was proof of a country so rich that it wrapped luxury in paper and gave it away to strangers. It was the taste of a society that produced more cacao than the entire Italian colonial empire had ever managed, and then airdropped the surplus to teenage girls who had killed men with grenades made from sardine cans. Each time a partisan unwrapped the silver foil, the crackle became a quiet declaration. This is what freedom manufactures in its factories: sweetness shared without hierarchy. The transformation was immediate and profound. Women who had accepted danger as the price of fleeting equality now glimpsed the possibility of equality without danger. In the liberated zones, partisan commands that had once relegated women to liaison duties began electing them to staff positions. In tweeting on Aprile 28, 1945, the Volante Rossa Brigade chose 23-year-old partisan Francesca Solsi as political commissar, an act unthinkable 6 months earlier. In Milan, the day after the insurrection, American war correspondents photographed Ada Gobetti, deputy commander of the Giustizia e Libertà formations, standing beside General Mark Clark as an equal, not an ornament. The photographs ran in stars and stripes under the caption, "Italian Amazon receives U.S. tribute." Yet the deepest change was internal. Decades later, in oral histories collected by the Istituto Nazionale per la Storia del Movimento de Liberazione, partisan after partisan returned to that first encounter with American soldiers and spoke of a physical sensation, a loosening in the chest, as if an iron band they had worn since childhood had snapped. They described the chocolate melting on their tongues and the sudden, dizzying realization that the world could be otherwise. They had fought for liberation from fascism. They discovered, in the space of a single morning, that liberation could also mean freedom from the older tyranny of gender. By the summer of 1945, more than 4,000 Italian women had formally enrolled in the auxiliary service of the renewed Italian army, serving as drivers, clerks, and instructors alongside men who now saluted them. The Constitution of the Italian Republic, promulgated in 1948, would contain Article 3. All citizens have equal social dignity and are equal before the law, without distinction of sex. Those words were not born in parliamentary chambers alone. They were born on muddy dikes in the Po Valley, in the crackle of silver foil, in the steady gaze of American soldiers who saw armed women and simply said, "Welcome to the fight." Years later, Iris Versati, who became a school teacher in Forlì, kept one object on her desk until the day she died: a flattened, faded Hershey wrapper pressed between glass. Children would ask what it was. She would tell them it was the taste of the future. And sometimes, when the afternoon light struck the wrapper just so, it glinted like a small, unbreakable metal, proof that once, on a spring morning when the war was almost over, 3 tired girls with rifles discovered that the world could be larger than anyone had told them it was allowed to be. That is the deeper truth carried in the roar of those half-tracks across the Lombard Plain. Freedom is not merely the absence of chains. It is the presence of chocolate offered without condescension, of maps spread for muddy female fingers, of a salute given where none was expected. In the end, the partisans did not simply help defeat fascism. They met a nation that, almost by accident, taught them that the revolution could continue long after the shooting stopped, one small, sweet, democratic square at a time.